In July 1656, within a Portuguese synagogue, the most violent curse in modern Jewish history was pronounced. The words were so harsh that they made adult men tremble. The decree began like this: "With the judgment of the angels and the verdict of the saints, we excommunicate, expel, curse, and execrate Baruch Spinoza. His name would be erased. No one could approach him. No one could speak to him. No one could read his writings. His family was to treat him as dead. His memory was to be forgotten forever." Spinoza was 23 years old. His crime was questioning whether Adam and Eve had really existed as real people, whether the Garden of Eden was a geographical place or a metaphor, whether Moses had actually written the Torah, or if those texts were late human compilations. But what the rabbis did not know was that Spinoza was about to develop one of the most radical philosophies in human history, a philosophy that not only challenged the religious narrative about creation, but also anticipated by 3 centuries some of the most important discoveries of modern science. The debate about human origins spans millennia. On one side, the sacred scriptures assert that humanity descends from a primordial couple, created directly by God. On the other side, modern science demonstrates that our species evolved over millions of years from common primate ancestors. Divine creation versus natural evolution, faith versus reason, Genesis versus Darwin. But Spinoza proposed something completely different, something that enraged both the religious of his time and centuries later would irritate staunch materialists. He proposed that the very question was poorly formulated, that separating God from nature was a fundamental misunderstanding, that opposing creation to evolution was like opposing the ocean to its waves. For Spinoza, God and nature are synonymous. There is no creator separate from his creation. There is no initial moment where something emerged from nothing by magical will. And there is no blind chance governing meaningless processes. There is only an infinite and eternal substance that expresses itself in infinite modes. And we human beings are some of those modes. We are not special creatures made in the image of an anthropomorphic God. We are not purposeless evolutionary accidents. We are necessary and eternal expressions of the divine nature itself. Adam, in this interpretation, was never a historical person. Adam is a symbol of all humanity. Eve is not the first woman. Eve represents the very life-generating force of nature. The serpent is not a talking reptile. The serpent is human reason awakening to itself. And the fall is not original sin. The fall is the emergence of reflective consciousness. These ideas cost Spinoza everything. He lived the rest of his life in social isolation, earning a living polishing optical lenses, writing in secret, publishing anonymously. He died at 44, likely from silicosis, caused by the glass dust he inhaled daily at work. But his ideas survived, and today, nearly 4 centuries later, they continue to offer a third way between religious fundamentalism and reductionist materialism. In the upcoming blocks, we will explore in depth how Spinoza arrived at these conclusions. We will understand his revolutionary reading of the scriptures. We will see how he anticipated concepts of evolution, neuroscience, and ecology. We will discover why his philosophy was so feared that even today few dare to fully comprehend it. This is a journey through the most radical thought on human origins ever conceived, a journey that could forever change the way we understand our relationship with the divine, with nature, and with ourselves. The story actually begins long before Spinoza was born. It begins with an obsession that spans all of human history, the need to know where we came from. All ancient cultures tried to answer this question. The Sumerians believed that the gods created humans from clay to serve as laborers. The Egyptians had multiple versions, some involving the god Atum masturbating to create the universe. The Greeks told the story of Prometheus shaping humans from clay and stealing fire from the gods to animate them. The Norse spoke of Ask and Embla, the first man and the first woman, created from tree trunks. But the narrative that dominated the West for over 2,000 years was that of Genesis. Adam created from the dust of the earth. Eve formed from his rib. The Garden of Eden as the original home. The serpent offering the forbidden fruit. The fall and expulsion from paradise. This story was not seen as metaphor. It was viewed as a literal, factual, unquestionable history. Adam and Eve were as real as Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great. The Garden of Eden was a geographical place that had simply been lost after the fall. The serpent was a real animal that somehow had spoken in human language before God cursed it to crawl. For centuries, questioning any detail of this narrative was heresy punishable by death. The Inquisition burned people for much less. The Protestant reformers, despite all their theological innovations, maintained absolute belief in the literalness of Genesis. And then Baruch Spinoza was born in 1632 into a family of Sephardic Jews who had fled the Portuguese Inquisition. His father was a prosperous merchant, a respected member of the Jewish community. Spinoza was educated in the best Jewish schools, learning Hebrew, Aramaic, studying the Talmud and rabbinic commentaries. He was, by all accounts, a prodigy. By the age of 15, he had already mastered texts that experienced rabbis took decades to understand. He was expected to become one of the great masters of his generation. But something happened. Something changed within Spinoza's mind as he studied those ancient texts. He began to notice inconsistencies, small at first, details that did not fit. Moses describing his own death in Deuteronomy, passages that had clearly been written centuries after the events they described. Different literary styles within the same book, direct contradictions between parallel narratives. Spinoza did not share these observations with his teachers, not yet. He knew the danger of questioning the scriptures, but he continued studying now with different eyes. And the more he studied, the more he realized that those texts were not what they claimed to be. They were not direct revelations from God dictated word for word. They were human compilations, written over centuries, edited, revised, interpolated. Fascinating historical documents, certainly, but human, fallible, contradictory documents, products of their time and culture. And if this was true about the authorship of the texts, then the content also needed to be re-evaluated. The stories of miracles, the direct divine interventions, the face-to-face conversations with God, all of this needed to be understood not as literal historical accounts, but as theological narratives written with specific purposes, including the story of Adam and Eve. Spinoza realized something that today seems obvious to many, but that in his time was absolutely revolutionary. The narrative of Genesis was not written to be a scientific or historical account of the origin of the human species. It was written to teach moral and theological lessons within a specific cultural context. Adam is not a historical individual. Adam is humanity. The very name in Hebrew, Adamah, means earth or soil. Adam is the earthly human, the being that comes from the earth and returns to the earth. It is the very human condition personified. Eve, Hava in Hebrew, means life or living being. She is not the first female of the Homo sapiens species. She represents the vital principle, the generative force of existence, the creative nature of life. The Garden of Eden is not a lost geographical location, somewhere between the Tigris and the Euphrates. It is a state of consciousness. It is pre-reflective innocence, existence without painful self-awareness, the state of immediate union with nature before the awakening of reason. The serpent is not a talking reptile cursed by God. The serpent, in ancient traditions, was a symbol of wisdom, knowledge, renewal. It is human reason emerging, the capacity to question, to doubt, to know beyond instinctive innocence. And the fall, the famous fall, the original sin that supposedly condemned all humanity. Spinoza saw something completely different there. The fall is not a moral catastrophe. It is the awakening of human consciousness. It is the moment when humanity becomes human, the moment when we transition from innocent animals to beings aware of our own existence, of our mortality, of our apparent separation from the rest of nature. It is not a fall downwards. It is an elevation, a necessary transformation, the painful birth of humanity as a self-aware species. But recognizing this meant acknowledging that the scriptures were not literally true, that God had not created a specific couple at a specific moment in time. That human history was much older, much more complex, much more fascinating than the simplified narrative of Genesis suggested, and even more radical. It meant recognizing that we did not need a special divine revelation to understand our origin, that human reason, carefully applied to nature. Spinoza argued that this substance is what we understand as God. This identification is revolutionary because it redefines the concept of divinity. God is not a distant creator or a personal being who intervenes in the world. Rather, God is the very essence of existence itself, manifesting in all things. This means that everything that exists is a part of God, and thus everything is interconnected. Spinoza's philosophy challenges the traditional views of religion and morality. If God is synonymous with nature, then our understanding of good and evil must also evolve. Morality cannot be dictated by divine commandments, but must be based on the understanding of the natural world and the laws that govern it. This leads to a more rational and compassionate approach to ethics, one that is grounded in the realities of human existence rather than in fear of divine punishment. In his work, Spinoza also delves into the nature of the mind and body. He posits that the mind and body are two aspects of the same substance. This dual aspect theory suggests that mental states and physical states are not separate, but are two ways of understanding the same reality. This idea has profound implications for psychology, philosophy, and even neuroscience, as it invites us to consider how our thoughts and feelings are deeply intertwined with our physical existence. Spinoza's insights into the mind-body relationship also foreshadowed modern scientific discoveries. He anticipated the idea that our thoughts and emotions are not merely products of a separate, immaterial mind, but are deeply rooted in our biological and environmental contexts. This holistic view of human existence encourages a more integrated understanding of ourselves as beings shaped by both our internal experiences and the external world. As we explore Spinoza's ideas further, we begin to see how they resonate with contemporary discussions about consciousness, identity, and the nature of reality. His work invites us to question our assumptions and to embrace a more expansive view of existence that transcends traditional boundaries. Spinoza's influence extends beyond philosophy into the realms of science, literature, and politics. His ideas laid the groundwork for the Enlightenment, inspiring thinkers who sought to challenge dogma and promote reason. His vision of a rational, interconnected universe has inspired countless individuals to seek knowledge and understanding in their own lives. In conclusion, Spinoza's philosophy offers a radical rethinking of our place in the universe. By identifying God with nature and proposing that everything is interconnected, he challenges us to reconsider our beliefs about divinity, morality, and existence itself. His work encourages a dialogue that continues to resonate today, inviting us to explore the depths of our understanding and to embrace the complexity of the world around us. As we reflect on these ideas, we are reminded of the power of philosophy to transform our thinking and to illuminate the path toward greater understanding. Simultaneously, God and nature, not God as an old bearded man sitting on a celestial throne, not God as a person who gets angry, who regrets, who changes his mind, but God as the infinite totality of being, as the eternal essence of everything that exists, as the absolute power that produces all things without choice, without deliberation, simply by the necessity of its own nature, and not nature as a dead machine governed by external laws, but nature as the living manifestation of the divine, as infinite creative expression, as the eternal process of self-organization and self-expression. Now, what does this mean for human origin? It means that we cannot think of humans as special creations, separate from the rest of nature. Humans are not made in the image of God in an anthropomorphic sense. Humans are, like everything else, finite modes of infinite substance. We are temporary and limited expressions of the eternal and unlimited God nature. More specifically, Spinoza distinguishes two attributes of substance that we can know: thought and extension. The infinite substance expresses itself both as physical matter and as mental activity, and these are not two separate substances, but two aspects of the same substance. A human being, therefore, is simultaneously a body and a mind, but not in the Cartesian sense of two different substances that interact mysteriously. For Spinoza, body and mind are the same thing seen from two different angles. They are two aspects of a single mode of substance. When we understand this, the whole question of Adam and Eve versus evolution transforms. Adam was not created from dust in a literal sense, but there is a deep truth in the image. The human body is literally made of material elements from the earth: carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, the same elements that constitute rocks, water, air, plants, animals. We are animated earth, organized dust in complex patterns, And the divine breath that animated Adam? There is also truth there, if interpreted correctly. Human consciousness is not something added from outside to an inert body. It is the mental expression of what the body is doing. It is how God nature experiences itself through this particular complex organization of matter. Spinoza had an extraordinarily modern view of what we today call the mind-body problem. For him, there is no problem. There is no mystery about how the immaterial mind interacts with the material body, because mind and body are not different substances. They are different aspects of the same reality. When my brain processes visual information, this is, from the point of view of extension, a set of physical processes. Neurons firing, neurotransmitters being released, electrical patterns propagating. And this is, from the point of view of thought, an experience of seeing colors, shapes, movements. They are not two separate things happening in parallel. It is a single thing seen in two ways. This had radical implications for how to think about the origin of consciousness. If mind and body are two aspects of the same reality, then wherever there is a complexly organized body, there is also mind, not necessarily self-reflective human consciousness, but some level of mental activity corresponding to bodily organization. Animals have minds. Plants have minds. Even in a very attenuated sense, stones have minds, because everything is a mode of substance that has both an aspect of extension and an aspect of thought. This is not naive animism. Spinoza is not saying that stones think like humans think. He is saying that thought, as an infinite attribute of substance, expresses itself at all levels of material organization, each corresponding to the degree of complexity of the corresponding body. Human consciousness, then, did not arise from nothing. It was not breathed into an inert body by an external God. It emerged gradually as animal bodies became more complex. It emerged from nature itself, developing increasingly sophisticated forms of self-organization. There was no first conscious human, just as there is no first wave that is truly a wave. Human consciousness gradually emerged from earlier forms of animal consciousness, which emerged from even simpler forms of sensitivity, which emerged from the very basic activity of organized matter. And all of this is God knowing itself through increasingly complex forms. This was Spinoza's vision, a vision that anticipated not only biological evolution, but also modern neuroscience, complexity theory, the contemporary understanding of how consciousness emerges from material organization. And all of this 3 centuries before these sciences existed. How did he achieve this? Through the pure power of reason applied rigorously, through the courage to follow logical arguments to their conclusions, no matter how heretical those conclusions seemed. But Spinoza did not stop at metaphysics. He needed to explain why, if his philosophy was correct, the scriptures seemed to tell such a different story. Why does Genesis speak of Adam and Eve as real people if they are symbols? Why does Moses present creation as happening in 6 literal days if the process was gradual and without a temporal beginning? To answer these questions, Spinoza wrote another revolutionary work, the Theological Political Treatise. This book is considered the foundation of modern biblical criticism. In it, Spinoza applies to the sacred text the same type of analysis he would apply to any historical document. He asks simple but devastating questions. Who really wrote the Pentateuch? When was it written? Under what historical circumstances? For what purposes? For what audience? And his conclusions were shocking for the time. Moses did not write the Pentateuch. The first 5 books of the Bible were compiled centuries after the events they describe, by editors who combined different oral and written traditions, often contradictory to each other. Spinoza demonstrated this textually. He pointed out passages where Moses speaks of himself in the third person, passages that describe events after Moses' death, passages that use place names that only existed centuries later, duplications of stories with variations, abrupt changes in literary style within the same book. All of this pointed to an inevitable conclusion. The Bible was not dictated by God. It was written by humans, in specific historical contexts, with human limitations and biases. This does not mean that the Bible is useless. Far from it. For Spinoza, the scriptures have immense value, but not as a source of scientific or metaphysical truth, and rather as a document of a human search for meaning, as an expression of deep religious experiences, as a moral guide for specific communities in specific times. The error, Spinoza said, is to treat poetry as geology. It is to treat metaphor as history. It is to treat theological narrative as scientific report. The story of Adam and Eve is not a report on the origin of the human species. It is a theological narrative about the human condition. It is a meditation on innocence and knowledge, on harmony and alienation, on unity with nature, and self-conscious separation from it. Read this way, the Genesis story is profoundly true. Not factually true, but existentially true. It captures something real about what it is to be human, about our ambiguous relationship with our bodies, with our desires, with our mortality, with our consciousness. Spinoza was not destroying the Bible. He was liberating it. He was allowing the text to reveal its true meaning, no longer trapped in impossible literalness. Think of the serpent. If you have to believe that there was literally a talking reptile in the Garden of Eden, then you miss the real symbolism. The serpent in ancient cultures represented wisdom, knowledge, transformation. Snakes shed their skin, symbolizing renewal. They crawl between the earth and the trees, mediating between worlds. The serpent offering the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil is human reason emerging. It is the moment when our hominid ancestors began to have reflective consciousness. They began to make moral choices. They began to experience the anguish of freedom. And this was not a fall. It was an elevation. It was the birth of humanity as a moral species, as a species capable of distinguishing right from wrong, as a species capable of choosing its path. But with this elevation also came suffering. Self-consciousness brings painful self-knowledge, knowledge of mortality, knowledge of our vulnerability, knowledge of our apparent separation from the rest of nature. Genesis captures this perfectly. After eating the fruit, Adam and Eve gain knowledge, but lose innocence. They gain freedom but lose security. They gain autonomy but lose harmonious union with the divine. This is the human condition, and it was the human condition long before any text was written about it. It was the condition of our ancestors when they developed symbolic language, when they began to bury their dead with rituals, when they created art on the walls of caves, when they first asked, "Where did we come from? Where are we going? Why do we exist?" Spinoza understood that these questions cannot be answered by literal creation stories. They can only be answered by a deep understanding of our nature as finite modes of infinite substance, as temporary expressions of the eternal, as individual consciousnesses briefly emerging from the ocean of divine nature, experiencing themselves as separate, but in truth always part of the whole. This understanding dissolves the apparent conflict between creation and evolution. We do not need to choose between Adam and the monkeys, because neither Adam nor the monkeys are the point. The point is to understand that humanity is a process, not an event. It is a continuous expression of divine nature, not a finished product of a single creative moment. Our bodies have evolved, obviously. We share ancestors with all primates, with all mammals, with all animals, with all forms of life. Eventually, with the very chemical elements forged in dead stars billions of years before Earth existed. But this does not make our existence any less divine. It makes it more divine, because it reveals the infinitely creative process of nature producing, through billions of years of self-organization, forms capable of knowing themselves, capable of understanding the cosmos, capable of experiencing beauty, truth, love. We were not created apart from nature. We are nature becoming aware of itself. We are the universe opening its eyes. We are God knowing itself through human form. This was Spinoza's radical synthesis, a synthesis that honored both the depth of religious narratives and the power of rational inquiry, a synthesis that did not reduce humans to machines nor elevate them to angels, a synthesis that placed us exactly where we belong, as an integral part of a living, thinking, divine cosmos. Spinoza spent his last years in relative isolation. After his excommunication, he moved cities several times, always seeking places where he could work in peace. Eventually, he settled in The Hague, where he rented a modest room and spent his days polishing lenses and writing philosophy. His life was simple, frugal. Some close friends visited him. He maintained correspondence with leading intellectuals in Europe, but he avoided publicity. He declined a university chair offered to him because it would require compromising his freedom of thought. He refused a pension from a nobleman because he did not want to owe anything to anyone. He worked on lenses during the day, breathing the fine glass dust that would eventually destroy his lungs. At night, he wrote page after page of dense, rigorous, revolutionary philosophy. The Ethics was his masterpiece, but he did not publish it during his lifetime. He knew it would be immediately banned. He knew it would bring trouble not only for him but for his friends and publishers, so he kept it in manuscript form, sharing it only with a few confidants. Yet even so, his reputation spread. Spinoza, the atheist Jew. Spinoza, the blasphemer. Spinoza, the man who equated God with nature, and thus supposedly destroyed both. In 1673, Germany was at war with France. Spinoza was invited to meet with a German prince who had an interest in philosophy. He accepted, traveled to the battlefield, had his meeting. When he returned, rumors spread that he had been a French spy. Crowds gathered outside his home, threatening to lynch him. His landlord had to protect him. This was the price of thinking freely in the 17th century. In 1677, at the age of 44, Spinoza died, probably of silicosis, the lung disease caused by prolonged inhalation of glass dust. His last months were marked by constant coughing, difficulty breathing, progressive weakness. He died alone except for his landlord and a friend who was a doctor. In the following weeks, his friends secretly published the Ethics, along with other unfinished works. The books appeared without an author's name, without an identified publisher, without a city of publication, and they were immediately banned in almost all of Europe. But ideas could not be banned. They spread. In clandestine circles at first, then gradually influencing the Enlightenment. Spinoza never had direct disciples, but he had countless intellectual heirs. Voltaire read him, Rousseau quoted him. The French encyclopedists were influenced by him. Goethe revered him, calling him the most Christian of philosophers even though he was never a Christian. Hegel built his dialectic in part on Spinozist foundations. Marx was influenced. Nietzsche admired him deeply. And Einstein. Einstein, when asked if he believed in God, replied, "I believe in the God of Spinoza, who reveals himself in the ordered harmony of what exists, not in a God who concerns himself with the fates and actions of human beings." For Einstein, Spinoza's equation, God equals nature, made perfect sense. The universe governed by necessary natural laws, without whim, without arbitrary intervention, but also without being accidental or meaningless. The universe as a manifestation of a deep rationality, of mathematical beauty, of an order that deserves reverence. This is the vision that Spinoza bequeathed to modernity, and it is remarkable how it remains relevant, how it offers an alternative to both traditional theism and materialist atheism. Against traditional theism, Spinoza argued that God is not a person separate from the world. He is not a celestial king issuing commands and punishing disobedience. He is not a being who can be persuaded by prayers or appeased by sacrifices. He is not, in short, an enlarged projection of human kings. God is the totality of existence, the infinite substance, the immanent cause of all things, not an external cause that creates and then observes from the outside, but an internal cause that is identical to its effects. Against materialist atheism, Spinoza argued that nature is not just dead matter following blind laws. Nature has both mental and physical aspects. Every existing thing has a thought aspect corresponding to its extension aspect. The universe is, in a certain deep sense, alive and conscious at all its levels. This view is sometimes called pantheism, but Spinoza preferred not to use that term because it had connotations of primitive animism. He was proposing something much more sophisticated, something that only now with quantum physics, with complexity theory, with cognitive science, we are beginning to fully appreciate. Spinoza was proposing that mind and matter are not different substances, but different aspects of a single reality. That consciousness is not an accidental epiphenomenon of complex matter, but a fundamental property of reality as much as spatial extension. This has profound implications for how we think about our origin. If consciousness is fundamental, then it did not arise at some point in evolution. It has always been there in increasingly complex forms as matter organized itself into ever more sophisticated patterns. Bacteria have a rudimentary form of sensitivity, not self-reflective consciousness, but some kind of internal experience corresponding to their biochemical processes. Insects have more complex experiences, mammals even more so. Primates develop self-awareness. Humans develop symbolic consciousness, language, the capacity for abstract reflection. But all of this is continuous development, not magical leaps. There is no moment where consciousness is blown into a previously unconscious body. There is only progressive complexification of something that was there from the beginning. And if we go back far enough, matter itself emerges from quantum fields, which have extraordinarily strange properties. Particles that seem to know of the existence of other distant particles, systems that remain entangled across space, potentials that collapse into actualities when observed. Modern physics is revealing that matter at its most fundamental level is not dead, is not passive, is not entirely determined by external causes. There is something of activity, of creativity, of indeterminacy at the very heart of matter. Spinoza could not know the details of quantum physics, but intuitively, he understood that matter could not be entirely passive if thought would emerge from it. He understood that mind and matter had to be aspects of the same substance from the very beginning. This intuition placed him centuries ahead of his time, and it still is ahead of much contemporary thought, which struggles to understand how consciousness emerges from neurons, how meaning emerges from electrical signals, how subjective experience emerges from objective processes. Spinoza's answer: it does not emerge. It has always been there. Every physical process has an experiential aspect. What varies is only the degree of complexity and integration. Now we need to return to the original question with all of Spinoza's philosophical apparatus in mind. Did humans come from Adam and Eve or from monkeys? Spinoza would say, both answers are right and both are wrong, depending on how we interpret them. If by Adam and Eve we mean a literal historical couple created specially by an anthropomorphic God at a specific moment in the past, then no, obviously we did not come from them. That narrative is mythological, not historical. If by monkeys we mean that we are merely animals evolved through purely mechanical and meaningless processes, that our consciousness is an accident, that our values are illusions, that our search for meaning is absurd, then no, that is also wrong. That view is too reductionist, too materialist, unable to do justice to the depth of human experience. The truth for Spinoza lies in a synthesis that transcends both alternatives. We came from nature, but nature is divine. Therefore, we came from the divine, but not through a special act of separate creation, through a necessary process of self-expression of the infinite substance. Our bodies evolved from earlier animal forms. That is a fact. We share 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees. We share common ancestors with all mammals. Our anatomy, our physiology, our behavior, all reveal our continuity with the pinnacle of evolution. We are a particular expression, with our particular form of consciousness and capacity, but not necessarily superior in an absolute sense to all other forms. Spinoza invites us to see each existing thing as perfect in its own nature, not perfect in the moral sense of being without flaws, perfect in the sense of being completely what it is, fully expressing its particular essence. This is a radically different way of seeing the world and seeing ourselves. But how does this abstract philosophy connect with our concrete experience? How does it help us live? How does it respond to the existential questions that the story of Adam and Eve traditionally addressed? The traditional narrative of Genesis served multiple psychological and social functions. It explained why there is suffering in the world, why there is death, why there is conflict between desires and duties, why we feel shame about our bodies, why women suffer in childbirth, why work is hard. All of this was attributed to the fall of Adam and Eve. There was an original state of perfection, there was innocence, there was harmony with God, and then came disobedience, original sin, and everything was corrupted. We inherit this corruption. We are born in sin, and we can only be saved by divine grace, by repentance, by faith. This narrative offers an explanation for suffering. It offers a promise of redemption. It offers a path back to lost harmony. But Spinoza completely rejected this structure. For him, there was no fall. There is no original sin. There is no inherited corruption. There is no need for external salvation. The human condition, with all its suffering and conflict, is not the result of a moral catastrophe in the past. It is simply the nature of being a finite mode of the infinite substance. It is the nature of being conscious, self-conscious, capable of imagining alternatives, capable of desiring more than we can have. Human suffering comes from our inadequacy to what is. It comes from wanting things to be different from what they are. It comes from identifying with our finite egos instead of our infinite essence. It comes from not understanding our true nature. But this is not a moral failing. It is simply ignorance. And the cure is not repentance or faith, it is knowledge, it is understanding, it is seeing clearly how things really are. Spinoza called this beatitude. It is the state of supreme happiness that comes from understanding our union with God nature, from seeing that everything that happens necessarily, from fully accepting reality as it is, from acting not out of fear or hope, but from a rational understanding of what is truly good for us. This is a very different form of ethics from traditional ethics based on divine commandments. Spinoza does not ask, "What does God command?" He asks, "What is really good for a human being to understand their own nature?" And his answer is, "What increases our power to act? What expands our capacity to affect and be affected? What develops our understanding? What strengthens our connection with the totality of nature?" Vice is not disobedience to arbitrary rules. It is acting in ways that diminish our power. It is being dominated by passive passions instead of acting from active understanding. It is living in illusion about our nature and our place in the cosmos. Virtue is not conformity to commandments. It is living according to our true nature. It is acting with understanding. It is maximizing our capacity to think, feel, act, create. In this ethics, there is no divine judgment to fear. There is no eternal punishment for the wicked nor celestial reward for the good. There are only the natural consequences of our actions. Acting with understanding produces joy, peace, fullness. Acting with ignorance produces suffering, conflict, emptiness. And this connects directly with the question of origin. If we do not inherit original sin from Adam, then we are not born corrupted. We are born as pure expressions of divine nature. Our task is not to overcome an innate moral failing. It is simply to develop our capacity for understanding. Children are not sinners needing salvation. They are manifestations of divine life, not yet developed in their rational capacity, but perfect in their current stage of development. Animals are not inferior for lacking an immortal soul. They are complete expressions of nature in their particular forms, each with its particular mode of consciousness and activity. And humans are not the pinnacle of evolution. We are a particular expression, with our particular form of consciousness and capacity, but not necessarily superior in an absolute sense to all other forms. Spinoza invites us to see each existing thing as perfect in its own nature. Not perfect in the moral sense of being without flaws, perfect in the sense of being completely what it is, fully expressing its particular essence. This is a radically different way of seeing the world and seeing ourselves. But how does this abstract philosophy connect with our concrete experience? How does it help us live? How does it respond to the existential questions that the story of Adam and Eve traditionally addressed? The traditional narrative of Genesis served multiple psychological and social functions. It explained why there is suffering in the world, why there is death, why there is conflict between desires and duties, why we feel shame about our bodies, why women suffer in childbirth, why work is hard. All of this was attributed to the fall of Adam and Eve. There was an original state of perfection, there was innocence, there was harmony with God. And then came disobedience, original sin, and everything was corrupted. We inherit this corruption. We are born in sin. And we can only be saved by divine grace, by repentance, by faith. This narrative offers an explanation for suffering. It offers a promise of redemption. It offers a path back to lost harmony. But Spinoza completely rejected this structure. For him, there was no fall. There is no original sin. There is no inherited corruption. There is no need for external salvation. The human condition, with all its suffering and conflict, is not the result of a moral catastrophe in the past. It is simply the nature of being a finite mode of the infinite substance. It is the nature of being conscious, self-conscious, capable of imagining alternatives, capable of desiring more than we can have. Human suffering comes from our inadequacy to what is. It comes from wanting things to be different from what they are. It comes from identifying with our finite egos instead of our infinite essence. It comes from not understanding our true nature. But this is not a moral failing. It is simply ignorance. And the cure is not repentance or faith, it is knowledge, it is understanding. It is seeing clearly how things really are. Spinoza called this beatitude. It is the state of supreme happiness that comes from understanding our union with God nature, from seeing that everything that happens necessarily, from fully accepting reality as it is, from acting not out of fear or hope, but from a rational understanding of what is truly good for us. This is a very different form of ethics from traditional ethics based on divine commandments. Spinoza does not ask, "What does God command?" He asks, "What is really good for a human being to understand their own nature?" And his answer is, "What increases our power to act? What expands our capacity to affect and be affected? What develops our understanding? What strengthens our connection with the totality of nature?" Vice is not disobedience to arbitrary rules. It is acting in ways that diminish our power. It is being dominated by passive passions instead of acting from active understanding. It is living in illusion about our nature and our place in the cosmos. Virtue is not conformity to commandments. It is living according to our true nature. It is acting with understanding. It is maximizing our capacity to think, feel, act, create. In this ethics, there is no divine judgment to fear. There is no eternal punishment for the wicked nor celestial reward for the good. There are only the natural consequences of our actions. Acting with understanding produces joy, peace, fullness. Acting with ignorance produces suffering, conflict, emptiness. And this connects directly with the question of origin. If we do not inherit original sin from Adam, then we are not born corrupted. We are born as pure expressions of divine nature. Our task is not to overcome an innate moral failing. It is simply to develop our capacity for understanding. Children are not sinners needing salvation. They are manifestations of divine life, not yet developed in their rational capacity, but perfect in their current stage of development. Animals are not inferior for lacking an immortal soul. They are complete expressions of nature in their particular forms, each with its particular mode of consciousness and activity. And humans are not the pinnacle of evolution. We are a particular expression, with our particular form of consciousness and capacity, but not necessarily superior in an absolute sense to all other forms. Spinoza invites us to see each existing thing as perfect in its own nature, not perfect in the moral sense of being without flaws, perfect in the sense of being completely what it is, fully expressing its particular essence. This is a radically different way of seeing the world and seeing ourselves. But how does this abstract philosophy connect with our concrete experience? How does it help us live? How does it respond to the existential questions that the story of Adam and Eve traditionally addressed? The traditional narrative of Genesis served multiple psychological and social functions. It explained why there is suffering in the world, why there is death, why there is conflict between desires and duties, why we feel shame about our bodies, why women suffer in childbirth, why work is hard. All of this was attributed to the fall of Adam and Eve. There was an original state of perfection, there was innocence, there was harmony with God, and then came disobedience, original sin, and everything was corrupted. We inherit this corruption. We are born in sin, and we can only be saved by divine grace, by repentance, by faith. This narrative offers an explanation for suffering. It offers a promise of redemption. It offers a path back to lost harmony. But Spinoza completely rejected this structure. For him, there was no fall. There is no original sin. There is no inherited corruption. There is no need for external salvation. The human condition, with all its suffering and conflict, is not the result of a moral catastrophe in the past. It is simply the nature of being a finite mode of the infinite substance. It is the nature of being conscious, self-conscious, capable of imagining alternatives, capable of desiring more than we can have. Human suffering comes from our inadequacy to what is. It comes from wanting things to be different from what they are. It comes from identifying with our finite egos instead of our infinite essence. It comes from not understanding our true nature. But this is not a moral failing. It is simply ignorance. And the cure is not repentance or faith, it is knowledge, it is understanding. It is seeing clearly how things really are. Spinoza called this beatitude. It is the state of supreme happiness that comes from understanding our union with God nature, from seeing that everything that happens happens necessarily, from fully accepting reality as it is, from acting not out of fear or hope, but from a rational understanding of what is truly good for us. This is a very different form of ethics from traditional ethics based on divine commandments. Spinoza does not ask, "What does God command?" He asks, "What is really good for a human being to understand their own nature?" And his answer is, "What increases our power to act? What expands our capacity to affect and be affected? What develops our understanding? What strengthens our connection with the totality of nature?" Vice is not disobedience to arbitrary rules. It is acting in ways that diminish our power. It is being dominated by passive passions instead of acting from active understanding. It is living in illusion about our nature and our place in the cosmos. Virtue is not conformity to commandments. It is living according to our true nature. It is acting with understanding. It is maximizing our capacity to think, feel, act, create. In this ethics, there is no divine judgment to fear. There is no eternal punishment for the wicked nor celestial reward for the good. There are only the natural consequences of our actions. Acting with understanding produces joy, peace, fullness. Acting with ignorance produces suffering, conflict, emptiness. And this connects directly with the question of origin. If we do not inherit original sin from Adam, then we are not born corrupted. We are born as pure expressions of divine nature. Our task is not to overcome an innate moral failing. It is simply to develop our capacity for understanding. Children are not sinners needing salvation. They are manifestations of divine life, not yet developed in their rational capacity, but perfect in their current stage of development. Animals are not inferior for lacking an immortal soul. They are complete expressions of nature in their particular forms, each with its particular mode of consciousness and activity. And humans are not the pinnacle of evolution. We are a particular expression, with our particular form of consciousness and capacity, but not necessarily superior in an absolute sense to all other forms. Spinoza invites us to see each existing thing as perfect in its own nature, not perfect in the moral sense of being without flaws, perfect in the sense of being completely what it is, fully expressing its particular essence. This is a radically different way of seeing the world and seeing ourselves. But how does this abstract philosophy connect with our concrete experience? How does it help us live? How does it respond to the existential questions that the story of Adam and Eve traditionally addressed? The traditional narrative of Genesis served multiple psychological and social functions. It explained why there is suffering in the world, why there is death, why there is conflict between desires and duties, why we feel shame about our bodies, why women suffer in childbirth, why work is hard. All of this was attributed to the fall of Adam and Eve. There was an original state of perfection, there was innocence, there was harmony with God, and then came disobedience, original sin, and everything was corrupted. We inherit this corruption. We are born in sin, and we can only be saved by divine grace, by repentance, by faith. This narrative offers an explanation for suffering. It offers a promise of redemption. It offers a path back to lost harmony. But Spinoza completely rejected this structure. For him, there was no fall. There is no original sin. There is no inherited corruption. There is no need for external salvation. The human condition, with all its suffering and conflict, is not the result of a moral catastrophe in the past. It is simply the nature of being a finite mode of the infinite substance. It is the nature of being conscious, self-conscious, capable of imagining alternatives, capable of desiring more than we can have. Human suffering comes from our inadequacy to what is. It comes from wanting things to be different from what they are. It comes from identifying with our finite egos instead of our infinite essence. It comes from not understanding our true nature. But this is not a moral failing. It is simply ignorance. And the cure is not repentance or faith, it is knowledge, it is understanding. It is seeing clearly how things really are. Spinoza called this beatitude. It is the state of supreme happiness that comes from understanding our union with God nature, from seeing that everything that happens happens necessarily, from fully accepting reality as it is, from acting not out of fear or hope, but from a rational understanding of what is truly good for us. This is a very different form of ethics from traditional ethics based on divine commandments. Spinoza does not ask, "What does God command?" He asks, "What is really good for a human being to understand their own nature?" And his answer is, "What increases our power to act? What expands our capacity to affect and be affected? What develops our understanding? What strengthens our connection with the totality of nature?" Vice is not disobedience to arbitrary rules. It is acting in ways that diminish our power. It is being dominated by passive passions instead of acting from active understanding. It is living in illusion about our nature and our place in the cosmos. Virtue is not conformity to commandments. It is living according to our true nature. It is acting with understanding. It is maximizing our capacity to think, feel, act, create. In this ethics, there is no divine judgment to fear. There is no eternal punishment for the wicked nor celestial reward for the good. There are only the natural consequences of our actions. Acting with understanding produces joy, peace, fullness. Acting with ignorance produces suffering, conflict, emptiness. And this connects directly with the question of origin. If we do not inherit original sin from Adam, then we are not born corrupted. We are born as pure expressions of divine nature. Our task is not to overcome an innate moral failing. It is simply to develop our capacity for understanding. Children are not sinners needing salvation. They are manifestations of divine life, not yet developed in their rational capacity, but perfect in their current stage of development. Animals are not inferior for lacking an immortal soul. They are complete expressions of nature in their particular forms, each with its particular mode of consciousness and activity. And humans are not the pinnacle of evolution. We are a particular expression, with our particular form of consciousness and capacity, but not necessarily superior in an absolute sense to all other forms. Spinoza invites us to see each existing thing as perfect in its own nature, not perfect in the moral sense of being without flaws, perfect in the sense of being completely what it is, fully expressing its particular essence. This is a radically different way of seeing the world and seeing ourselves. But how does this abstract philosophy connect with our concrete experience? How does it help us live? How does it respond to the existential questions that the story of Adam and Eve traditionally addressed? The traditional narrative of Genesis served multiple psychological and social functions. It explained why there is suffering in the world, why there is death, why there is conflict between desires and duties, why we feel shame about our bodies, why women suffer in childbirth, why work is hard. All of this was attributed to the fall of Adam and Eve. There was an original state of perfection, there was innocence, there was harmony with God, and then came disobedience, original sin, and everything was corrupted. We inherit this corruption. We are born in sin, and we can only be saved by divine grace, by repentance, by faith. This narrative offers an explanation for suffering. It offers a promise of redemption. It offers a path back to lost harmony. But Spinoza completely rejected this structure. For him, there was no fall. There is no original sin. There is no inherited corruption. There is no need for external salvation. The human condition, with all its suffering and conflict, is not the result of a moral catastrophe in the past. It is simply the nature of being a finite mode of the infinite substance. It is the nature of being conscious, self-conscious, capable of imagining alternatives, capable of desiring more than we can have. Human suffering comes from our inadequacy to what is. It comes from wanting things to be different from what they are. It comes from identifying with our finite egos instead of our infinite essence. It comes from not understanding our true nature. But this is not a moral failing. It is simply ignorance. And the cure is not repentance or faith, it is knowledge, it is understanding. It is seeing clearly how things really are. Spinoza called this beatitude. It is the state of supreme happiness that comes from understanding our union with God nature, from seeing that everything that happens necessarily, from fully accepting reality as it is, from acting not out of fear or hope, but from a rational understanding of what is truly good for us. This is a very different form of ethics from traditional ethics based on divine commandments. SP special for having been created separately. We are special only in the sense that we have developed a particular type of reflective consciousness and rational capacity that allows us to understand the totality of nature in a way that other beings cannot. But this capacity does not elevate us above nature. It makes us more fully nature. It makes us nature conscious of itself. This view had radical political implications as well. If all humans are equally modes of the divine substance, then there is no justification for hierarchies based on birth, race, gender, or religion. Human equality is not an abstract political doctrine. It is a metaphysical fact. Spinoza was one of the first philosophers to argue for religious tolerance, not as a pragmatic concession, but as a philosophical imperative. If each person is an expression of divine nature, then each person has the right to think freely, to seek understanding in their own way. He argued for separation between church and state, for freedom of expression, for democracy, all of this in the 17th century, when these ideas were dangerously radical. And all of this flowed from his understanding of human nature. We are not subjects of a celestial king needing priestly mediation. We are direct expressions of the divine, each with direct access to truth through reason. We do not need special revelation. We do not need miracles. We do not need external saviors. We only need to develop our natural capacity for understanding. This was Spinoza's liberating message, and that is why he was so feared, because his philosophy rendered all power structures based on religious authority obsolete. It made priests, rabbis, imams unnecessary as intermediaries between humans and the divine. It made kings who claimed to rule by divine right ridiculous. If each person is equally a mode of God, then all human hierarchies are human conventions, not divine ordinations. And conventions can be questioned, reformed, or abolished if they do not serve human flourishing. Spinoza was planting seeds that would only fully germinate centuries later. Seeds of democracy, human rights, secularism, individual freedom, and it all began with that simple question about Adam and Eve. By questioning the literalness of the Genesis narrative, Spinoza opened space to completely rethink human nature, the divine, ethics, and politics. Now we need to confront an objection that surely arose in your mind. If Spinoza is right, if God and nature are identical, if everything happens necessarily, if there is no free will in the traditional sense, then does that not lead to fatalism, to nihilism, to a lack of meaning? If we are merely necessary modes of a deterministic substance, if our choices are illusory, if there is no transcendent moral judgment, then why do anything? Why be ethical? Why seek knowledge? Why live? This objection was raised against Spinoza in his time and continues to be raised today, and he had a sophisticated answer. First, necessity is not the opposite of meaning. It is the opposite of arbitrariness. To say that something happens necessarily does not mean it happens without reason. It means it happens for a complete reason, for sufficient causes, as an expression of the nature of things. A mathematical equation is necessary. 2 plus 2 necessarily equals 4. This does not make mathematics meaningless. It makes it perfectly rational, perfectly intelligible. Similarly, the universe is necessary. Everything flows necessarily from the nature of God nature, but this does not make the universe meaningless. It makes it completely rational, completely intelligible to a sufficiently developed mind. Second, the absence of libertarian free will does not mean the absence of freedom. For Spinoza, freedom is not the ability to choose arbitrarily between indifferent alternatives. Freedom is acting according to one's own nature, not being forced by external causes. A falling stone is not free because its fall is entirely determined by external causes like gravity. A human acting from a rational understanding of their own nature is free because they act from internal necessity, not external compulsion. The more we understand, the freer we are. Because understanding allows us to act according to our true nature instead of being pushed by passions we do not understand. Third, the absence of transcendent divine judgment does not mean the absence of moral value. Values do not need to be commands from a personal God to be real. Values emerge from the nature of conscious beings. It is truly good for a human being to understand. It is truly good to develop capacities. It is truly good to live in harmony with others, not because God commands it, but because that is how a human being flourishes. It is truly bad for a human being to be ignorant, to be weak, to be in conflict, not because God punishes it, but because that is how a human being suffers. Ethics, for Spinoza, is not obedience to arbitrary rules. It is understanding the nature of human flourishing. It is the applied science of living well. Fourth, and more profoundly, understanding that we are modes of God does not diminish us. It expands us, because it means our essence is infinite. It means we participate in eternity. It means we are not isolated egos condemned to extinction, but temporary expressions of something that never dies. Spinoza wrote one of the most beautiful passages in philosophy about this. He said that the more we understand particular things, the more we understand God. And the more we understand God, the more we understand particular things. And in this understanding lies our beatitude, our supreme happiness. To see a flower not just as an isolated object, but as an expression of infinite nature. To see a human face not just as a surface, but as a manifestation of the divine. To see even our own suffering not as cosmic injustice, but as a necessary part of the process by which finite beings experience existence. This understanding does not lead to passive fatalism. It leads to active acceptance, to the deep joy that comes from seeing that everything is exactly as it should be, that each thing is perfect in its own nature, that the entire universe is an expression of infinite rationality. And this completely transforms our relationship with the question of origin, because the question ceases to be, were we created by God or did we evolve by chance? The question becomes, how can we better understand our nature as expressions of infinite nature? And the answer involves both studying the scriptures as documents of human wisdom and studying biology, physics, all the sciences that reveal how nature operates. Because everything is a revelation of the divine. Everything is God expressing itself. DNA is no less sacred than Genesis. Evolution is no less miraculous than creation. Natural selection is no less divine than the breath of life in Adam. Everything is a manifestation of the infinite substance. Everything is God nature, operating necessarily according to its eternal essence. And we who can understand this, who can have this vision of the whole, are the universe knowing itself. We are God experiencing its own existence through finite forms. This is Spinoza's radical synthesis. A synthesis that honors both the depth of religious traditions and the power of scientific inquiry, a synthesis that dissolves false oppositions between faith and reason, between spirit and matter, between creation and evolution, and a synthesis that offers a way of living, an ethics based not on fear or hope of future rewards, but on present understanding of our true nature, a politics based not on divine hierarchies, but on the metaphysical equality of all beings, a spirituality based not on rituals and doctrines, but on direct experience of union with the whole. Spinoza died nearly 3.5 centuries ago, but his ideas remain alive, remain relevant, continue to offer an alternative to fundamentalisms of all kinds. Because in a world where religious and scientific people often see each other as enemies, where creationists and evolutionists fight endlessly, where faith and reason are set in opposition, Spinoza offers a third way. A way that says, you are both right about something and both wrong about something. You are both seeing aspects of the truth and both missing the whole. The whole is that we are nature, we are divine, we are evolutionary processes, we are eternal expressions, we are matter, we are consciousness, we are finite, we are infinite. We are all of this simultaneously because we are modes of the substance that is everything. To fully understand how Spinoza would respond to the question of our origin, we need to dive deeper into his theory of knowledge, because for him, the way we know something determines what we can say about it. Spinoza distinguished 3 genres of knowledge. The first genre is knowledge by vague experience or hearsay. It is the knowledge we acquire casually through the senses, through reports from others, through signs and words. It is the most common type of knowledge, but also the most inadequate. When someone reads the story of Adam and Eve literally and believes there was a historical couple in the Garden of Eden, they are operating in this first genre. They are taking written signs at face value, without critical understanding, without analysis of the real causes. The second genre of knowledge is rational knowledge. It is the knowledge that proceeds from common notions and adequate ideas of the properties of things. It is the type of knowledge that mathematicians have of their theorems, that physicists have, natural laws, which philosophers have of logical principles. When someone studies evolution and understands how natural selection operates, how genetic mutations are preserved or eliminated, how species diverge over time, they are operating in the second kind. They are comprehending real causes, natural laws, rational principles. But Spinoza proposed a third kind of knowledge, higher than the other two. He called it intuitive knowledge or intuitive science. It is the knowledge that proceeds from the adequate idea of the formal essence of certain attributes of God to the adequate knowledge of the essence of things. This third kind is difficult to explain because it is hard to experience. It is like trying to explain the color red to someone who has never seen it. But Spinoza offers clues. In the third kind, we do not merely see that something is the case, nor do we just understand why it is the case. We see how it could not be otherwise. We see the absolute necessity of the thing following from the essence of God. We see the thing sub specie eternitatis, under the aspect of eternity. When someone, through long study and deep meditation, comes to see their own existence, not as a historical accident, nor as a result of mechanical processes, but as a necessary expression of the infinite substance, then they are operating in the third kind. They are seeing their eternal essence. They are experiencing their union with God. This distinction of three kinds illuminates why the debate between creationism and evolution is often sterile. Both sides are operating in different kinds of knowledge and do not recognize this. Literal creationists primarily operate in the first kind. They have sacred texts, interpret them literally, believe based on authority and tradition. When confronted with scientific evidence, they often reject it because their knowledge is not based on empirical evidence or logical reasoning, but on faith in revelation. Scientific evolutionists operate in the second kind. They have fossil evidence. They have comparative genetics. They have mathematical models. When confronted with appeals to sacred scriptures, they often reject them because their knowledge is not based on textual authority, but on empirical and theoretical investigation. Both sides think they are disputing over facts, but in reality, they are operating in completely different modes of knowing, with different criteria of truth, with different assumptions about what counts as evidence. Spinoza would not say that one side is simply right and the other simply wrong. He would say that both are inadequate because they are trapped in their respective kinds of knowledge and cannot ascend to the third. Intuitive knowledge would see that religious narratives capture deep existential truths about the human condition, but are not literal historical accounts. It would see that scientific descriptions capture real processes in nature, but do not exhaust the metaphysical meaning of those processes. It would see that evolution and creation are not mutually exclusive alternatives, but complementary descriptions of a single process viewed from different perspectives. Evolution describes the how, creation points to the what. Evolution traces the temporal mechanism, creation indicates the eternal meaning. To illustrate this, Spinoza often used the example of the circle. A circle can be defined in various ways. It can be defined as a figure where all points are equidistant from a center. It can be defined as the geometric place of points satisfying a certain equation. It can be described in terms of how to draw it with a compass. All these definitions and descriptions are true, but only the first, which captures the essence of the circle, allows for intuitive knowledge. It allows one to see why the circle has all the properties it has. It allows one to necessarily derive all theorems about circles from that essence. Similarly, humanity can be described in various ways. It can be described mythologically as the descent of Adam and Eve. It can be described biologically as the species Homo sapiens evolved from hominid ancestors. It can be described sociologically, psychologically, anthropologically. All these descriptions capture aspects of the truth. But only intuitive knowledge allows one to see the essence of humanity. And this essence for Spinoza is finite mode of the infinite substance characterized by a certain degree of power to think and act. Viewed this essence, everything else follows necessarily. It follows that humans are mortal because finite modes have limited duration. It follows that humans seek self-preservation because every mode expresses the power to exist. It follows that humans desire to understand because understanding increases power. It follows that humans evolve biologically because finite modes are produced by other finite modes through natural causal chains. It follows that humans create religious narratives because finite consciousness seeks to comprehend the infinite. Everything follows necessarily from the essence. There is no accident. There is no radical contingency, but there is also no mechanical determinism without meaning. There is rational necessity, necessity that flows from the nature of things. This view dissolves the apparent conflict between necessity and freedom, between determinism and purpose, between science and meaning, because it shows that necessity does not exclude meaning. On the contrary, only the necessary can have complete meaning. The contingent, the arbitrary, the accidental would be meaningless. If God created humans arbitrarily, by divine whim without necessary reason, then our existence would be absurd. We would be products of arbitrary will. We could be destroyed equally arbitrarily. We would have no rational foundation. But if our existence follows necessarily from the eternal nature of God, then we are founded in absolute being. We are expressions of infinite rationality. We are eternal in essence, even though temporary in existence. This is a profoundly comforting way to view our origin. We do not need a personal God loving us specially to have value. Our value lies in being what we are, necessary expressions of the absolute. We do not need to fear that our existence is a meaningless accident in an indifferent universe. Our existence is necessary to the nature of the universe being what it is, and we do not need to worry about the tension between our biological animality and our spiritual aspiration. Because both are aspects of the same reality. Our evolved bodies are manifestations of the attribute of extension. Our reflective consciousness is a manifestation of the attribute of thought, and both are God nature expressing itself. Spinoza lived this philosophy. It was not abstract speculation for him. It was the way he truly saw the world, and this shines through in his serenity in the face of persecution, in his acceptance of premature death, in his generosity with friends despite poverty. He had truly achieved what he called beatitude, the state of deep joy that comes from understanding that everything is as it should be, that you are part of the whole, that your essence is eternal. It was not superficial happiness. It was deep peace. It was inner freedom that no external circumstance could destroy, and he believed that this beatitude was available to anyone willing to do the work of understanding. It was not a privilege of saints or mystics especially favored by divine revelation. It was the natural result of rigorously applying reason to the nature of reality. This was Spinoza's democratic project, to liberate philosophy from specialists, spirituality from priests, truth from guardians of orthodoxies, to show that every human being, using their natural reason, can achieve supreme understanding. We do not need intermediaries. We do not need special revelations. We do not need miracles. We only need to think clearly, observe carefully, reason rigorously, and when we do this, we discover that we are divine, not in the grandiose sense of being separate gods, but in the profound sense of being modes of God, expressions of the divine, participants in eternity. But how exactly does this philosophy connect with modern scientific knowledge about human evolution? Spinoza could not know what we know today about DNA, fossils, hominid ancestors. Is his philosophy still relevant, or has it been surpassed by scientific advances? The surprising answer is that Spinoza's philosophy becomes more, not less relevant in light of modern science. Because modern science confirms crucial aspects of his vision and makes the need for his philosophical synthesis even more pressing. Let us begin with what science has discovered about our origin. The story is extraordinary. For most of the Earth's existence, there was no life. Then, about 4 billion years ago, the first unicellular organisms emerged. For billions of years, life remained microscopic, simple, without visible complexity. Then, about 540 million years ago, there was an explosion of diversity. Complex multicellular forms appeared relatively quickly, animals with eyes, with nervous systems, with segmented bodies. The first vertebrates emerged in the oceans. Some eventually developed the ability to breathe air and move on land. Amphibians gave rise to reptiles. Reptiles gave rise to mammals and birds. Mammals diversified after the extinction of the dinosaurs. Among mammals, primates emerged about 65 million years ago. Primates developed hands that could grasp, forward-facing eyes with stereoscopic vision, relatively large brains. About 7 million years ago, the lineage that would lead to humans split from the lineage that would lead to chimpanzees. Several species of hominids emerged in Africa. Australopithecus walked upright, but had a small brain. Homo habilis made simple tools. Homo erectus mastered fire and migrated from Africa. Homo sapiens, our own species, emerged in Africa about 300,000 years ago. For most of that time, we lived as hunter-gatherers in small groups. We developed complex symbolic language. We created art, music, rituals. We buried our dead with ceremonies. About 70,000 years ago, something changed. Perhaps a genetic mutation, perhaps a cultural innovation. But modern humans began to spread from Africa, replacing or absorbing other hominid species like Neanderthals and Denisovans. 10,000 years ago, we began agriculture. 5,000 years ago, we created cities and writing. And in the last few centuries, we developed modern science, technology, global civilization. This history, laboriously reconstructed through fossils, ancient DNA archaeology, is profoundly different from the story of Adam and Eve. There was no sudden creation in a garden. There was a long, gradual, contingent process, full of extinctions and new beginnings. Philosophical materialists look at this history and conclude, see, we are accidents, products of random mutations and blind selection. There is no purpose, no meaning, nothing special about human consciousness. We are just monkeys with big brains. But Spinoza would say, you are only seeing half the truth. Yes, this is what happened in the attribute of extension, in the material dimension. But there is also the attribute of thought, and each stage of this evolution has a corresponding mental aspect. Life did not arise from dead matter, because there is no absolutely dead matter. There are different degrees of organization, different levels of complexity, different modes of substance. And each mode has both a physical aspect and a mental aspect. The first cells were not just organized molecules, they were also the first systems with something like sensitivity, with a rudimentary capacity to respond to the environment in ways that promote their continuation. Multicellular organisms were not just clusters of cells. They were integrated systems with something like internal experience, with primitive feeling corresponding to their metabolic processes. Animals with nervous systems were not just biological machines responding to stimuli. They were centers of subjective experience, with something like what it is to be that animal, with an internal perspective on the world. And humans are not just big brains processing information. We are reflective consciousness, self-knowledge, the capacity to understand not only the world, but our own understanding of the world. Each stage is the emergence of new complexity in both the physical and mental aspects. Because mind and body are not separate substances, they are aspects of the same infinite substance expressing itself in increasing levels of complexity. Modern science, particularly neuroscience and cognitive science, is beginning to recognize that consciousness cannot be explained purely in physical terms. The hard problem of consciousness, as it is called, is, why are physical processes in the brain accompanied by subjective experience? Why is there something like what it is to be you? Materialists try to dissolve the problem by saying that consciousness is an illusion, or that it is just behavior, or that it will eventually be explained by more advanced neuroscience. But these strategies are not convincing. Subjective experience is the most direct data we have. It is more certain than any scientific theory. It cannot be an illusion because even illusions are experiences. Dualists, on the other hand, postulate that the mind is a separate, non-physical substance interacting mysteriously with the physical body. But this creates insurmountable problems about how two radically different substances could interact. Spinoza offers an elegant alternative. Mind and body are not different substances, nor is the mind reducible to the body. They are aspects of the same reality. Each physical process in the brain is identical to a mental process, not causally related, but literally the same thing seen from two perspectives. This is the theory of double-aspect identity, and it is gaining new defenders in contemporary philosophy of mind precisely because it dissolves the seemingly insoluble problems of dualism and materialism. If Spinoza is right, then evolution is not just a physical process. It is also the evolution of consciousness. It is the infinite substance developing increasingly complex forms of self-knowledge. Bacteria represent a very basic level of sensitivity. Insects represent more complex feeling. Mammals represent emotions, memories, learning. Primates represent rudimentary self-knowledge, theory of mind, culture. And humans represent symbolic consciousness, the capacity for abstract reflection, rational understanding of the cosmos. We are the universe not only experiencing itself, but understanding itself. Seen this way, evolution is not a meaningless process. It is a process through which the cosmos develops organs of self-knowledge. It is God nature creating mirrors in which it can reflect. And this gives new meaning to the story of Adam and Eve. The moment when Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge and gain self-awareness can be read as an allegory of the evolution of human self-consciousness. Our hominid ancestors, like other animals, lived in the immediate present. They did not worry about the distant past or the distant future. They did not contemplate their own mortality. They did not ask about the meaning of existence. But at some point, perhaps gradually, perhaps through a cognitive leap, humans developed extended temporal consciousness. We began to remember the distant past, plan for the distant future, conceive of our own inevitable death. This was simultaneously an elevation and a fall. An elevation because it made us unique among animals in our capacity for understanding. A fall because it expelled us from animal innocence, from immediate union with nature, from existence without anxiety about mortality. This is the paradox of the human condition that Genesis captures so perfectly. We are animals who know we are animals. We are nature that has become self-aware, and this self-awareness brings both blessing and curse. Blessing because we can understand, create love in ways that no other animal can. Curse because we are haunted by our finitude, by our mortality, by our apparent separation from the rest of existence. Spinoza offers a path back to paradise, not through faith in an external savior, but through understanding our true nature. When we understand that we are eternal modes of the infinite substance, the anxiety about mortality dissolves, because we see that our essence never dies. When we understand that we are expressions of divine nature, the feeling of alienation dissolves, because we see that we have never been separate, that we have always been part of the whole. This is the philosophical redemption, and it is available here, now, in this life, through the work of understanding. But what about the practical implications of this view? How does it concretely affect the way we live, the choices we make, the values we uphold? Spinoza was not an ivory tower philosopher speculating about abstractions disconnected from life. He was deeply interested in how philosophy could transform human experience, eliminate unnecessary suffering, promote flourishing. His ethics flow directly from his metaphysics. If we are finite modes of the infinite substance, then our highest good is to understand our true nature and live according to it. And this has concrete consequences. First, about death and mortality. If our essence is eternal, if we are expressions of God who is eternal, then although our individual bodies perish, something in us is imperishable, not in the sense of an immortal soul separated living after death, but in the sense of our essence being an eternal pattern in the mind of God. Spinoza wrote one of the most comforting passages in philosophy about this. The free man thinks of nothing less than death, and his wisdom is not meditation on death, but on life. Why does the free man not think of death? Because he understands that death is merely the transition of a finite mode, returning to the infinite substance. It is not annihilation, it is transformation. It is like a wave dissolving back into the ocean. The specific wave ceases, but the water continues, has always been part of the ocean, always will be. When we understand this, the terror of death dissipates, not because we have a promise of personal life after death, but because we see that our fear was based on the illusion that we are separate entities that can be annihilated. In fact, we have always been part of the eternal whole. This profoundly transforms how we live. We do not live in terror of judgment after death. We do not live in hope of future reward. We live fully in the present, knowing that this moment, this experience, is eternity manifesting now. Second, about morality and ethics. If there is no personal God judging our actions, if there is no original sin inherited, if there is no external salvation needed, then on what basis do we make ethical decisions? For Spinoza, ethics is simply applied knowledge about human nature. Good is what increases our power to act and think. Evil is what diminishes that power. Virtue is acting according to the understanding of our nature. Vice is being dominated by passions we do not understand. Genuine love, for example, is virtue because it increases our power. When we truly love someone, not out of neurotic dependence but out of joy in their existence, we become more powerful. We expand our capacity to affect and be affected. We connect more deeply with the relational aspect of existence. Hatred, by contrast, is vice because it diminishes our power. When we hate, we contract, we close ourselves off, we reduce our capacity to fully experience life. We become dominated by a destructive passion that weakens us. But here is the crucial point. Spinoza does not say we must love and must not hate because God commands it. He shows that love increases power and hatred decreases power as a matter of observable fact about human nature. It is an empirical discovery about what promotes human flourishing, not an arbitrary commandment. This makes ethics natural rather than supernatural. It makes it based on reason rather than authority, and it makes it universal, because human nature is essentially the same across all cultures and times. Third, regarding social relations and politics, if all humans are equally modes of God, then all hierarchies based on race, gender, class, and religion are artificial. They are human conventions, not divine ordinations. Spinoza argued that the state exists to promote freedom, not to impose orthodoxy, that freedom of thought and expression are natural rights that no government can legitimately suppress. That democracy is the most natural form of government, because it recognizes the fundamental equality of all. These were dangerously radical ideas in the 17th century, but they logically followed from his metaphysics. If each person is an expression of the divine, then each person has absolute value that must be respected. This does not mean that all people are equal in abilities. Obviously, they are not. Some are more intelligent, stronger, more creative than others, but all are equal in essence in the right to exist and flourish, in metaphysical value as expressions of God. Fourth, regarding nature and ecology. If God and nature are identical, then all of nature is sacred. Not just humans, but animals, plants, entire ecosystems are manifestations of the divine. Spinoza did not develop a complete environmental ethics, but his philosophy provides a foundation for one. If everything is a mode of God, then unnecessarily destroying any part of nature is to profane the divine. This does not mean that we should never use natural resources. It means that we should do so with reverence, with recognition that we are interacting with aspects of the sacred, with an understanding of our interconnectedness with the entire web of life. The contemporary ecological crisis can be seen as a result of forgetting this truth. When we see nature merely as resources to be exploited, when we forget that we are part of it and not separate lords, we destroy the very conditions of our existence. Returning to Spinoza's view, seeing nature as divine, seeing ourselves as modes among other modes, could ground a deeper ecological ethics than any pragmatic appeal to sustainability. Fifth, regarding science and knowledge. If knowing is participating in God's self-knowledge, then science is a spiritual activity. Not in the sense of seeking miracles or supernatural interventions, but in the sense of revealing the rational structure of the cosmos. Each scientific discovery is a revelation of how God nature operates. Physics equations are thoughts in the divine mind. Laws of biology are patterns through which infinite substance expresses itself in living forms. This gives new meaning and dignity to scientific inquiry. Scientists are not mere collectors of random facts. They are explorers of the mind of God. They are participants in the process by which the cosmos comes to understand itself. And this dissolves the apparent conflict between science and spirituality. Science, correctly understood, is spirituality. It is the practice of reverent attention to the nature of reality. It is the discipline of allowing things to reveal themselves as they truly are, rather than imposing our projections upon them. Finally, regarding personal meaning and purpose. If we were not created for a specific purpose by a personal God, if our existence is merely a necessary expression of infinite substance, then do our lives have meaning? Spinoza would say they have more meaning than they ever would under traditional views, because under traditional views we are servants of a divine master. Our purpose is external to us, imposed from outside, could be different if God so wished, but under Spinoza's view, our purpose is internal to our nature. It is to fully realize our essence as conscious, rational beings. It is to develop our capacity to understand, create, love, and experience to the fullest. We do not need external justification for our existence. Simply existing as a mode of infinite substance, consciously experiencing reality, participating in the self-knowledge of the cosmos, that is sufficient meaning, and each person can contribute in their own way. Some through scientific inquiry, some through artistic creation, some through compassionate service, some through contemplative living. There is no hierarchy of vocations. All are forms through which God nature expresses and knows itself. Now we need to directly address a question that has surely arisen. If Spinoza is right, what happens to traditional religions? Are they all false? Should they be abandoned? How can religious people relate to this philosophy? Spinoza's answer was more nuanced than his critics and defenders often recognize. He was not simply attacking religion. He was trying to save it from its own superstitious distortions. In the theological political treatise, Spinoza distinguished between faith and philosophy, between religion and superstition, between true prophet and false prophet. He did not reject everything wholesale. He made careful distinctions. True religion, for Spinoza, is the practice of justice and charity. It is to love one's neighbor as oneself. It is to act with compassion and integrity. And this does not require correct metaphysical beliefs. It requires only sincerity of heart and kindness of action. One may have completely misguided theology, may believe in literal stories that are metaphorical, may have anthropomorphic conceptions of God, but if one acts with love and justice, one is truly religious. On the other hand, one may have perfectly correct philosophy, may understand that God and nature are identical, may have intuitive knowledge of infinite substance, but if one acts with selfishness and cruelty, one is not religious at all. So, Spinoza is not saying that all religious people are wrong and must become philosophers. He is saying that the heart of religion is ethical practice, not theological doctrine. The sacred scriptures, when correctly interpreted, teach this ethical practice. The narrative of Adam and Eve, for example, does not need to be believed literally to have value. It teaches about human responsibility, about the consequences of choices, about the relationship between knowledge and innocence. The problem is not the narrative itself. The problem is insisting that it must be interpreted literally, and then entering unnecessary conflict with scientific knowledge. Spinoza proposed that scriptures should be read as they were written, as human texts, in specific historical contexts, using figurative languages appropriate to their audiences. When Isaiah says that God became angry, he is not making a metaphysical statement about divine emotions. He is using anthropomorphism to communicate moral meaning. When Genesis describes creation in 6 days, it is not making scientific cosmology. It is using narrative structure to teach that the world is ordered, good, created with purpose. Read this way: sacred texts are valuable. They are expressions of accumulated human wisdom. They are meditations on perennial questions. They are vehicles through which previous generations attempted to articulate their experiences of the sacred, but they are not science. They are not metaphysics. They are not literal history. And trying to make them what they are not dishonors both religion and science. This distinction allows religious people to embrace scientific discoveries without abandoning their traditions. They can accept evolution as the correct description of how life developed, while maintaining that Genesis offers truths about the meaning of that life. They can recognize that Adam and Eve were not historical figures, while maintaining that the story captures something profound about the human condition. They can abandon literal miraculous interventions while retaining a sense of wonder and reverence before the natural processes that are themselves miraculous in their complexity and beauty. In fact, many contemporary theologians and religious thinkers have adopted something close to this position. Process theology, open theism, panentheism, all of these are attempts within religious traditions to incorporate modern scientific insights while maintaining religious commitment. And all owe something, directly or indirectly, to Spinoza. He paved the way for a reconciliation between faith and reason that does not require either the rejection of reason in the name of faith or the rejection of faith in the name of reason. But Spinoza also offers something for atheists and agnostics. Many people abandon religion because they cannot accept supernatural doctrines but miss a spiritual dimension, a sense of connection to something greater than individual ego. Spinoza's philosophy offers spirituality without supernaturalism. It offers reverence without revelation. It offers transcendence without traditional theism. One can have a profound experience of unity with the entire cosmos, a sense of peace and joy that comes from understanding one's place in the eternal order, without believing in a personal God or an afterlife. This is naturalistic spirituality, and it is becoming increasingly attractive to modern people who cannot accept traditional religions, but also do not find satisfaction in dry, materialistic atheism. Einstein is a perfect example. He did not believe in a personal God. He explicitly rejected a God who intervenes in history, who answers prayers, who judges human actions, but he was deeply spiritual. He had a sense of awe before the cosmic order. He felt reverence for the deep rationality of the universe, and he explicitly attributed this to Spinoza. "I believe in the God of Spinoza," was his response when asked about religious faith. Many contemporary scientists experience something similar. Carl Sagan wrote lyrically about the cosmos as a way of experiencing the sacred. Richard Dawkins, despite being a militant atheist, admits to feelings of awe before nature that are almost religious in intensity. What they are experiencing, without necessarily using philosophical language, is something close to Spinoza's vision, the recognition that nature is not merely dead matter, but something extraordinary, profound, worthy of reverence. So Spinoza's philosophy does not need to destroy religion. It can transform it. It can free it from unsustainable dogmas and allow its genuine essence to flourish. And also that we are all interconnected, that we share a common origin in the divine substance that is both God and nature. It speaks to the unity of humanity and the shared experience of existence. The story of Adam and Eve, when interpreted in this way, transcends the literal and becomes a profound reflection on our collective journey, our struggles, and our aspirations. Now, turning to the question of evolution. Spinoza would argue that evolution is not in opposition to the idea of humanity as expressions of the divine. Rather, it is a part of the unfolding of the infinite substance. Evolution is a process through which the divine manifests itself in the material world, allowing for the emergence of complex forms of life, including humans. This perspective harmonizes scientific understanding with a spiritual worldview, showing that the natural processes of evolution are not separate from the divine, but are, in fact, a means through which the divine expresses itself. In this light, the debate over whether humans originated from Adam and Eve or from monkeys becomes less about the specifics of historical events and more about the deeper truths that these narratives attempt to convey. It challenges us to reconsider our understanding of what it means to be human, to recognize that our existence is not merely a product of random chance, but is imbued with meaning and purpose that connects us to the infinite. Spinoza's philosophy invites us to embrace a more expansive view of humanity, one that acknowledges our place within the larger tapestry of existence. It encourages us to see ourselves not as isolated beings, but as part of a greater whole, interconnected with each other and with the universe. This understanding fosters a sense of responsibility towards one another and the world around us, urging us to act with compassion and integrity. Ultimately, the journey through Spinoza's thought leads us to a more profound appreciation of our humanity. It challenges us to confront the limitations of dogmatic beliefs and to seek knowledge through reason and experience. It empowers us to reclaim our authority over our understanding of truth and to recognize the divine within ourselves and in others. As we reflect on these ideas, we are reminded that the questions we ask about our origins and our nature are not merely academic. They are deeply personal and societal, shaping our identities and our relationships with one another. In a world that often seeks to divide us, Spinoza's vision of unity and interconnectedness offers a path towards greater understanding and harmony. In conclusion, the inquiry into whether humans originated from Adam and Eve or from evolutionary processes is a gateway into deeper philosophical and spiritual exploration. It invites us to engage with the complexities of existence, to embrace the richness of our shared humanity, and to recognize the divine essence that flows through all of creation. Through this lens, we can cultivate a more compassionate and enlightened society, one that honors the dignity of every individual and the interconnectedness of all life. About our dual nature, simultaneously animal and conscious, it tells about our awakening to self-awareness and knowledge that is simultaneously elevation and expulsion of innocence. It speaks of the permanent tension between our instinctive impulses and our rational aspirations. All of this is true, but true existentially, not historically. True about the permanent structure of human existence, not about specific events in the past. Second, about evolution. Humans have indeed evolved from primate ancestors. We share an evolutionary lineage with all mammals, with all animals, With all forms of life, our bodies are products of billions of years of biological evolution. Our DNA carries the complete history of this evolutionary journey. But evolution is not just a blind mechanical process. It is not merely random mutations filtered by natural selection. There is a deeper dimension. Evolution is the process through which infinite substance develops increasingly complex forms of self-organization and self-knowledge. Each evolutionary stage is an expression of potentialities already present in the fundamental nature of reality. Life did not arise from dead matter. It arose from matter that already had a rudimentary mental dimension, that already had primitive sensitivity, that was already an expression of substance that is simultaneously physical and mental. Consciousness did not arise from unconscious neurons. Neurons are always already conscious at some level, because every physical process has a corresponding mental aspect. What emerged was the progressive complexification of consciousness, culminating in human reflective self-awareness. Humanity is not an accident. It is a necessary expression of the infinite nature of God. Not necessary in the sense that God specifically needs Homo sapiens, but necessary in the sense that infinite substance necessarily expresses itself in infinite ways, and the human form is one of those necessary modes. Third, about the relationship between these two narratives, creation and evolution are not mutually exclusive alternatives. They are complementary descriptions of the same process seen from different perspectives. Evolution describes the temporal mechanism. Creation indicates the eternal meaning. Evolution traces how forms emerge from previous forms through natural processes. Creation points to the metaphysical foundation of the entire process, to the eternal substance that expresses itself through these temporal forms. Seen this way, conflict disappears. We can fully accept the discoveries of evolutionary biology while maintaining the view that reality has a spiritual dimension, that natural processes are expressions of the divine, that humanity has a meaning that transcends mere survival and reproduction. Fourth, about practical implications. This synthesis transforms how we live. It frees us from the false dilemma of rejecting reason to maintain faith or rejecting meaning to accept science. We can be fully rational, fully committed to the scientific method, fully honest about evidence while maintaining a deep sense of reverence for the cosmos, of awe in the face of existence, of gratitude for consciousness. We can accept our individual mortality while recognizing that we participate in something eternal. We can embrace our biological animality while celebrating our transcendent consciousness. We can live fully in the natural world while experiencing the spiritual dimension of existence. We do not need promises of an afterlife to find meaning. We do not need miraculous interventions to feel the presence of the divine. We do not need special revelations to know the truth. We only need to look carefully at reality as it is. We only need to think clearly about what we observe. We only need to feel deeply our connection to the totality of existence. Fifth, and finally, about the future. Spinoza's vision is not just about the past, about origin. It is about the future, about possibility, about what humanity can become. If we are modes through which God-nature comes to know itself, then our continuous development is a continuation of the cosmic creative process. Each advance in understanding is an expansion of divine self-awareness. Each growth in compassion is a deepening of divine love. Each creation of beauty is a new expression of divine creativity. Humanity is not a finished product. It is a continuous process. Evolution did not stop with the emergence of Homo sapiens. It continues, now not only biologically, but culturally, technologically, spiritually. We are becoming more conscious, more interconnected, more capable of understanding the cosmos and our place within it. And this is not just human progress, it is the cosmos evolving through us. Spinoza believed that understanding was the key to transformation. The more we understand, the freer we become. The freer we are, the more fully we express our divine essence. The more we express this essence, the more we contribute to the flourishing of the whole. This is an invitation, not just to accept certain philosophical propositions, but to live differently, to see the world with new eyes, to experience oneself as part of the eternal whole, to act not out of fear or greed, but out of understanding and love. The question about Adam and Eve versus evolution was the gateway. Through this door we enter a complete vision of reality that dissolves false dichotomies, reconciles apparent opposites, reveals the underlying unity of all that exists. This vision has been available for almost 4 centuries. Spinoza articulated it with extraordinary clarity and rigor. It was rejected, suppressed, misunderstood, but it survived. And today, as humanity faces crises that demand deeper wisdom than any of our isolated traditions can offer, Spinoza's vision offers a synthesis that honors both science and spirituality, both reason and reverence, both facts and values. It is not perfect. No human philosophy is, but it is profound, coherent, transformative, and it is waiting for those brave enough to contemplate it seriously. You have reached the end of this journey, but perhaps it is just the beginning. Because understanding Spinoza intellectually is one thing. Experiencing his vision, living according to his insights, transforming consciousness through his teachings, that is something entirely different. This is the work of a lifetime, but it is the most rewarding work of all, because it is the process of becoming who you truly are, a conscious expression of the divine, a finite mode of infinite substance, a momentary wave in the eternal ocean of existence. You did not come from Adam. You did not come from monkeys. You come from God. You are God, not in the sense of being an all-powerful creator, but in the sense of being a temporary manifestation of the eternal absolute. Understand this, live this, and everything will change.